Hi everyone, my name is John. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're a new subscriber. I have talked about a few times on this channel that I'm a co-host of an event here on BookTube called Historathon, and we are currently in our fourth iteration of it. It lasts all year, and during Historathon we read books from different eras in history. The first 3 months of the year, we read everything and anything nonfiction history from prehistory, as far as you want to go back. I say all the way back to Planck time, all the way up into the year 500 AD. So anything and everything, histories, autobiographies, you name it. As long as it's nonfiction, as long as it's history, it counts. So if you're interested in that period, and you're still looking to join Historathon, you don't have to join at the beginning of the year. You don't have to join at the beginning of a quarter. You can join whenever you want to. And I will leave the link below to our Historathon Discord. If you're interested in finding out more about it, you can go back and watch the video that I made towards the latter part of February, which I'll also try to remember to link below. And I also put out a Pile of Possibilities videos, which is a video of things I'm thinking about reading, which also sort of serves as a list of recommendations for anyone else who might want to use it as such. But one of the books that I read, let's see, when did I finish it? I finished it on January 24th. So I read it this year, and I wanted to talk about it because I bought it a couple of years ago at a Rutgers University Press sale. And this is part of their Rutgers University Press Classics line. This is Democracy, Ancient and Modern by Moses I. Finley, or M.I. Finley, as he's popularly known. And this is a little small book that I got, and just really on the cheap for something like $5, and wanted to talk about it. This is a collection of 5 lectures. It doesn't have really an overarching theme or anything. 5 lectures that were given at Rutgers University in the early 70s and later were cobbled together in book form. They cover different topics, but they all place the democracy of classical Athens in conversation with that of contemporary United States government and democracy for the purposes of better understanding modern democratic dilemmas, with some essays being more comparative than others. The topics covered range from the influence of Athenian demagogues, the role of consensus building in politics, free speech, and public participation. One of Finley's enduring points is that while all of these are important to how democracy functions, the shape of that democracy, whether it's active or passive, whether it's intimate and local, or big and bureaucratic, are directly related to how these social institutions look and act. The lecturers, like I said, don't present any kind of unified argument, so I'll just give a really quick and dirty summary of what I took away from each lecture. Okay, maybe not the most exciting review in the world, but I'll just tell you what each lecture is about and my thoughts on them in a few words. The first lecture is called Leaders and Followers, and in it Finley argues that the way in which a democracy functions matters, and that not all operate in the same way. He starts off by noting that Americans tend to be indifferent to civic education, something that hasn't really changed in the half a century since he wrote the book, that they also tend to be rather disengaged and poorly informed. He thinks this is directly related to our implicit acceptance of Schumpeter's idea of elitist democratic rule, basically the idea that voters are stupid, uninformed, poorly informed, and that they're irrational and need these sort of elites, these technocrats, to make decisions in their place. In an elitist democracy, voters have almost no direct say in important political decisions, but rather choose people to make decisions for them. This is basically classically our system of indirect democracy. We vote for people who make the decisions for us. We don't make them, usually, we don't have plebiscites, we don't have referenda to make important political decisions. Sometimes at the state level, but not at the national level. The democracy of classical Athens was fundamentally different. It was a rigorous, active, face-to-face activity, a public activity that depended on the ability of the politician to convince the public of their position through rhetorical skill and the exercise of practical judgment. Athens still had leaders, but their leadership was always up for public referendum. Not entrenched, not sclerotic, not unamenable to change. Finley isn't arguing that we can recreate Athenian democracy and make it work for a country of 350 million people today, but he nevertheless wants to stress how modern technology, sprawling bureaucracies, mass media, etc., shape the way that we practice democracy. And most importantly, he roundly rejects the cynicism and passivity that are necessary outcomes of the elitist style of democratic practice. The second essay is called Athenian Demagogues, and it argues that the demagogue was a feature, not a bug, of Athenian democracy. You can't have Greek democracy without understanding how citizens lived in close proximity to one another and interacted face to face. Therefore, decision-making happens not through policy platforms and not through a bureaucracy, but through the persuasion of active stakeholders. He argues that democracy takes place through demagoguery, a word that has deeply negative connotations today in English, but in the Greek context just means a leader who uses persuasion to argue for a certain interest, whether it's the national good or self-interest or personal power or whatever else. The point Finley makes in Athenian Demagogues is that you can't separate the achievements of Greek democracy, its ability to mobilize, adapt, persist, and engage in durable political decision-making, without also recognizing how those achievements took place. In the case of Athens, they didn't happen despite demagoguery, but because of it. The third essay is called Democracy, Consensus, and the National Interest, and in it, Finley talks about contemporary politics achieving consensus mostly through the preservation of stability and entrenched authority. The idea of not wanting to rock the boat, even when it means offering common sense solutions to imminent problems. Even though half a century ago he uses the example of climate change proposals being hard to implement because while they seem commonsensical, they suggested change to very core ideas of the way that we did things, pushing back against big coal, big oil. And because they were major changes, people really balked at the idea of instituting these changes. There were other reasons, of course, moneyed reasons, but change is one major reason why we don't have the amount of innovation, he thinks, that momentum for innovation that we would otherwise have. What results is a kind of governance that looks like stability and continuity, but is just thinly veiled cynicism and apathy. Even when decisions are thoroughly democratic in the sense Finley claims Greeks practiced it, things can go catastrophically wrong. He looks at the Persian Wars, the Peloponnesian Wars, and the struggle against Philip of Macedon to show that having consensus doesn't mean ensuring that a good decision or strategy will be made. The next essay is called Socrates and After, and it looks at how the trial of Socrates played out as a way of understanding the social and intellectual significance of dissent in Athens. He argues that Socrates is just one example of what happens when a society is provoked by political instability and it's strained by war. Socrates' very existence as a political and philosophical gadfly, by posing fundamental questions about the world around him, explains why he was seen as a corrupter of Athenian youth. When Athens took the definitive step of executing Socrates, they ended up turning him into a martyr in the writings of his students, most famously Plato and Xenophon. This initiated a centuries-old tradition in which the figure of the philosopher saw themselves as standing against instead of within the community. And the last essay is called Censorship in Classical Antiquity, and it extends Finley's conversation about freedom of speech from Socrates and after by arguing that censorship existed in classical Athens but worked in a very different way than it does today. Without the liberal idea of universal human rights, including free speech, speech was policed through civic roles and status. Most of the time, citizens enjoyed great latitude in what they could say. Even then, legal sanction for slander, impiety, or corruption could find you in court. Today, censorship often occurs ex ante. There were no systems in place to prevent saying something deemed inappropriate or illegal before release to the public. Instead, censorship happened ex post facto through prosecutions, loss of civic standing, or even exile, ostracization. Overall, this is a really interesting, thoughtful, comparative, as you can tell, look at the various and sundry ways in which democratic outcomes are shaped by the way that democracy itself is practiced. Without historical context, we can fall into the sort of easy assumption that the only way to practice democracy is the way that we see it being practiced around us. While ancient Athens and the United States both practice democracy, the differences obviously matter, and I think that's superficially obvious, but these essays flesh that fact out. Having a democracy based on rights instead of participation matters. Being suspicious of elites and expertise matters. Population scale changes everything. Democracy is not an unbroken 2,500-year-old tradition, but one that is born and reborn anew from the exigencies of the people who practice it. So, some meditation, summaries, thoughts, takeaways from M.I. Finley's Democracy, Ancient and Modern. Let me know if you have any thoughts, comments, questions, concerns in the comment section, and I will see you later.